Sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't the ones that glitter, but the forgotten stories that illuminate paths never taken. Michael Brennan stood transfixed in the dusty attic of his grandfather's abandoned farmhouse, holding a weather-worn leather journal that would alter the course of his life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ancient timber beams of the Colorado farmhouse groaned under the weight of decades as Michael carefully opened the brittle pages of the journal. His fingers trembled, not from the chill of the mountain air seeping through the rafters, but from the realization that he was about to uncover secrets his family had unknowingly harbored for generations. The date inscribed on the first page, June 14, 1891, sent a shiver down his spine. This diary predated even his grandfather's birth, belonging to a mysterious ancestor named Thomas Brennan, whose name had been merely a whisper in family stories. Michael hadn't planned on exploring the old attic today. He'd returned to the remote family property with a singular, pragmatic purpose: prepare the century-old homestead for sale. After 3 generations, the Brennan family legacy was about to end with him. The sprawling 180-acre property, nestled in the foothills of the San Juan Mountains, had once been the pride of his grandfather, but years of neglect following his death had left it in disrepair. The land itself remained valuable. A developer had already offered a substantial sum to transform the historic farm into luxury vacation homes, but the buildings were beyond economical restoration. Another relic for the estate sale, Michael had thought when he first spotted the journal, tucked inside a cedar chest beneath layers of moth-eaten quilts and yellowed newspapers. But as he'd opened it, something had fallen out. A faded, hand-drawn map on brittle parchment with markings that seemed to indicate terrain features in the nearby mountains. Captivated, he'd begun reading, and now, 3 hours later, he remained rooted in the same spot, surrounded by dancing dust motes in the late afternoon light. The journal told a remarkable story. One of Michael's great-great-grandfather, Thomas Brennan, a man who'd come to Colorado not as a farmer, but as a mining engineer. The farming operation, according to the journal entries, had been established as a cover for his true purpose: locating a legendary gold deposit that had been briefly discovered, then lost during the gold rush of the 1860s. May 3rd, 1891. Michael read aloud, his voice barely more than a whisper in the silent attic. Third expedition into Sawyer's Gulch proved fruitful beyond imagination. The test samples confirm what Jenkins stumbled upon 30 years ago. A vein, richer than anything in these mountains. I estimate its worth at millions, even by today's standards. But I must proceed with caution. The Blackwood Mining Company has spies everywhere, and I cannot risk them discovering the location before I've secured the claim properly. Michael ran his fingers along the weathered page, struggling to process what he was reading. If his ancestor had indeed discovered a rich gold deposit, why had the family lived as modest farmers for generations? Why had this journal been hidden, away and apparently forgotten? The answer came several entries later. July 18th, 1891. Disaster has struck. Blackwood's men ambushed Jenkins on his return from Denver. While they did not obtain the claim papers or maps, the message is clear. They suspect what we've found and will stop at nothing to take it. I've made the difficult decision to conceal all evidence of the mine's existence until safer conditions prevail. The entrance has been collapsed and camouflaged. The precise coordinates and access route are encoded within these pages using the cipher Jenkins and I developed. Should anything happen to me, may this journal find its way to someone worthy of its secrets. Michael's heart raced as he flipped through subsequent pages, finding detailed but cryptic notes, mathematical formulas, and references to landmarks that had likely changed significantly over the intervening century. The final entry, dated October 12, 1891, sent a chill through him. Winter approaches early this year. I've established the farm as our permanent residence to maintain our presence in the area without arousing suspicion. The mine remains our secret, its wealth preserved for a time when it can be safely extracted. I've entrusted this journal to my brother William with instructions to keep it hidden until I return from my meeting with our silent investor in Denver. Should I not return, he is to preserve this record for future generations of our family, when perhaps the Blackwood threat has passed. The journal ended there. According to family history, Thomas Brennan had died in a stagecoach accident on his return journey from Denver, an accident that had always been described as mysterious in the few family stories Michael had heard growing up. Now those stories took on an entirely new dimension. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown fields as Michael descended the narrow attic stairs, the journal clutched to his chest like a sacred text. The farmhouse kitchen, with its ancient cast-iron stove and worn wooden table, seemed different now, no longer just an outdated relic, but a deliberate facade hiding a remarkable secret. Michael's plan had been simple when he'd arrived a week ago. At 35, after a decade in corporate finance in Denver that had left him wealthy but unfulfilled, he decided to finally settle his grandfather's estate. The farm had been sitting abandoned for nearly 5 years since the old man's death. Michael's own father had left the family decades earlier, wanting nothing to do with the hardscrabble farming life, and had died 2 years ago without ever reconciling with his father or reclaiming his rural heritage. That had left Michael, an only child with no attachment to the land, as the sole heir to a property he'd visited only sporadically during childhood summers. The developer's offer had seemed like a godsend, a clean break from a legacy he had never embraced and a financial windfall that would pad his already comfortable existence. But the journal changed everything. If Thomas Brennan had indeed discovered a rich gold deposit, and if it remained undisturbed all these years. Michael set the journal on the kitchen table and pulled out his phone to check for reception, a futile habit in this remote valley where signals rarely penetrated. He needed information. Historical records about the Blackwood Mining Company, geological surveys of the area, anything that might help him make sense of his ancestors' claims. As darkness fell, Michael lit the old oil lamps, unwilling to trust. The farmhouse's questionable wiring with its frequently flickering lights. The warm glow illuminated the kitchen in a way that seemed to bridge the century between Thomas's time and his own. On impulse, he pulled out the property maps he'd brought for the sale preparations and spread them alongside the journal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The modern topographical renderings revealed that the Brennan farm occupied a strategic position at the entrance to a narrow canyon, one that would provide perfect access to the higher elevations while maintaining privacy from casual observers. Thomas had chosen this location deliberately, positioning himself as a gatekeeper to his hidden treasure. A knock at the door startled Michael from his thoughts. Few people ventured out to the old farm, especially after dark. Cautiously, he moved to the window and peered out to see an aging pickup truck in the yard, its headlights illuminating the overgrown path to the door. "Mr. Brennan, it's Sheriff Rawlins. Just doing my rounds and saw your lights. Wanted to make sure everything's all right out here." Michael recognized the man from his previous visits, the county sheriff who'd known his grandfather and occasionally checked on the vacant property. He tucked the journal into a kitchen drawer before opening the door. "Evening, Sheriff. Just going through some old family items before the sale goes through." The weathered lawman stepped inside, removing his hat. His eyes scanned the kitchen with the practiced gaze of someone who noticed details. "Heard about that sale. Harmon Development has big plans for this valley. Your grandfather would have hated it, if you don't mind my saying so." "I know," Michael acknowledged, feeling a new twinge of guilt. "But maintaining a property this size doesn't make sense anymore, not for me anyway." Sheriff Rawlins nodded, his attention drawn to the maps spread across the table. "Doing some surveying work?" "Just familiarizing myself with the property. Boundaries before the final paperwork," Michael replied, hoping his voice didn't betray his newfound interest in the land's hidden potential. "Actually, Sheriff, I was wondering if you might know anything about the history of mining in this area." Something flickered across the older man's face. Surprise, perhaps, or wariness. "Mining? Well, sure. This whole region was gold and silver country back in the day. Most of the accessible veins played out by the early 1900s, though. Why do you ask?" "Just curious about family history. I found some old papers suggesting my great-great-grandfather might have been involved in prospecting before he established the farm." The sheriff's expression remained carefully neutral. "The mountains keep their secrets well, Mr. Brennan. Lots of dreams buried up there alongside the dreamers who chase them." He replaced his hat. "I should continue my rounds. Just wanted to make sure you weren't having trouble out here alone." After the sheriff departed, Michael returned to the journal with renewed intensity. The casual exchange had left him with an unsettling impression that Sheriff Rawlins knew more than he was letting on, as if the mention of mining had triggered something. Late into the night, Michael pored over the journal entries, trying to decipher the encoded directions to the mine. Thomas Brennan had been clever, interweaving meaningful information with mundane farm details. References to crop rotations, livestock purchases, and weather patterns contained hidden meanings that would be indecipherable to casual readers, but potentially meaningful to family members who might understand the context. By dawn, bleary-eyed, but too energized to sleep, Michael had assembled several key pieces of information. The mine entrance was located approximately 3 miles from the farm, up a canyon that cut through the western edge of the property. Thomas had described specific landmarks: a distinctive rock formation resembling a hawk's head, 3 lightning-struck pines growing in a triangle pattern, and a seasonal waterfall that revealed the entrance only when it ran dry in late summer. The morning light revealed another detail Michael had missed. Holding certain pages of the journal up to the light showed faint watermarks, additional encoded information that had remained invisible in the lamplight. Pulling out his phone, he photographed these pages, planning to enhance the images once he returned to civilization and reliable internet access. A familiar knot formed in Michael's stomach as he realized the implications of his discovery. If the mine existed and remained undisturbed, its contents could be worth millions, perhaps tens of millions in today's gold market. But pursuing this would mean delaying or cancelling the property sale, investing significant resources in a treasure hunt that might yield nothing and potentially attracting unwanted attention. The developer's contract sat in his briefcase, awaiting his signature. The closing was scheduled for the end of the month, just 3 weeks away. He had a comfortable life waiting in Denver. His corner office, his luxury condo, his predictable routine. Yet as he watched the morning sun illuminate the San Juan Mountains in the distance, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine excitement. The corporate world had never ignited this feeling of possibility, of adventure, of connection to something greater than quarterly projections and investment returns. He pulled out his phone and, finding a single bar of reception near the kitchen window, dialed his assistant in Denver. "Claire, it's Michael. I need you to clear my calendar for the next 2 weeks. Family matters require my attention here longer than expected." After a pause, he added, "And see if you can find any information on a company called Blackwood Mining that operated in Colorado in the 1890s. The decision made, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He would give himself 2 weeks to investigate Thomas Brennan's claims before making any decisions about the property. 2 weeks to potentially discover why his family had maintained this seemingly unremarkable farm for generations despite its modest returns. After a quick breakfast, Michael gathered supplies for a preliminary expedition: water, energy bars, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit from his car. He tucked the journal and map safely into a waterproof bag and set off toward the canyon described in Thomas's writings. The farm had deteriorated over the years, but its bones remained strong. Fields once cultivated with wheat and corn had returned to their natural state, but the irrigation systems Thomas had engineered still shaped the landscape in subtle ways. As Michael hiked along the edge of a meadow, he realized that what he had always seen as random features, a line of cottonwood trees, a small pond, oddly placed rock formations, might actually be deliberate markers designed to guide family members to the secret Thomas had hidden. The canyon entrance was less impressive than Michael had imagined, just a narrow gap between rocky hillsides that most would overlook. But once inside, the passage opened dramatically, revealing a lush, hidden valley fed by mountain springs. The terrain grew steeper, requiring careful navigation across loose scree and around massive boulders. 2 hours into his hike, Michael paused to catch his breath and check his progress against the journal's descriptions. He should be nearing the Hawk's Head rock formation, but nothing in the surrounding landscape resembled such a feature. Had erosion changed the terrain so dramatically over 130 years? Or had he misinterpreted the directions? Frustration mounting, Michael climbed to a higher vantage point, scanning the canyon walls methodically. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows that transformed the rocky landscape, creating optical illusions and hiding potential landmarks. Just as he was about to retreat and reconsider his approach, a shadow shifted, and suddenly he saw it. A rocky outcropping that, from this precise angle, created a perfect silhouette of a raptor's profile against the canyon wall. The Hawk's Head wasn't a standalone formation, but a trick of light and perspective, visible only at certain times of day from specific vantage points. Thomas had been clever in his descriptions, ensuring that only someone who knew exactly what to look for and when could follow his trail. Energized by this discovery, Michael pressed on, now moving with greater confidence. The 3 lightning-struck pines proved equally challenging to locate, until he realized that Thomas hadn't meant living trees, but rather the petrified remains of ancient trunks, preserved in the arid mountain climate and positioned in a distinctive, triangular arrangement. By late afternoon, Michael had reached the location where the seasonal waterfall should be. The summer had been unusually dry, and as Thomas had predicted in his journal, the waterfall had reduced to a mere trickle, revealing a narrow fissure in the rock face behind it. The opening was barely wide enough for a man to slip through and would be completely invisible when the water flowed at full volume. Heart-pounding, Michael approached the crevice. This had to be the mine entrance that Thomas had collapsed and disguised. But something felt wrong. The ground near the opening showed signs of recent disturbance. Footprints in the soft earth, scuff marks on nearby rocks, a fresh scratch in the patina of the stone face. Someone had been here before him, and recently. Caution overrode excitement. As Michael retreated to a concealed position behind a large boulder, the journal had mentioned Blackwood Mining Company's determination to find the gold deposit. Could descendants of that company still be searching after all these years? Or was it simply other hikers or local explorers who had stumbled upon the unusual opening? As the shadows lengthened, Michael decided to postpone further exploration until he could return better equipped. He photographed the area carefully from multiple angles, marking the location on his phone's GPS, then began the journey back to the farmhouse, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. The return hike took longer than expected, as darkness fell quickly in the narrow canyon. By the time Michael emerged onto the farm's property, stars filled the night sky with remarkable clarity, unhindered by urban light pollution. The farmhouse's silhouette stood dark against the horizon, except for a dim light moving within. Michael froze. He had left no lights on when departing that morning. Someone was inside his house. Crouching low, he approached cautiously, using the overgrown vegetation as cover. The old pickup truck he spotted behind the barn confirmed his suspicion. Sheriff Rawlins had returned in his absence. But why would the sheriff enter the unoccupied house without permission? And why do so with only a flashlight rather than turning on the lights? Moving to a window, Michael peered inside to see the sheriff methodically searching through the kitchen drawers, the same drawers where Michael had placed Thomas's journal before his hike. Cold realization dawned. The sheriff's earlier visit hadn't been a routine check, but reconnaissance. Somehow he knew about the journal, or at least suspected its existence. The implications sent Michael's thoughts spiraling. If the sheriff was searching for information about the mine, others might be as well. The property sale, the developers, eager interest in this remote location, the unusual amount offered for land that had little conventional value, all took on new significance. Michael retreated silently, moving toward his car parked behind the house. He needed to regroup, to consider his options carefully before confronting whatever conspiracy had apparently surrounded his family's legacy for generations. The journal. Safely tucked in his backpack, Michael made a split-second decision, slipping away from the farmhouse before Sheriff Rawlins could discover his presence. He retreated to his SUV, parked at the edge of the property, and drove silently with headlights, off until he reached the main road, where he pulled into a hidden turnout beneath a stand of ponderosa pines. The valley spread out below him, The farmhouse a tiny speck in the darkness. His mind raced, attempting to process how the discovery of Thomas's journal had almost instantly transformed his life from corporate tedium to dangerous mystery. He waited nearly 2 hours, watching through binoculars as the sheriff's flashlight moved through the farmhouse before finally disappearing. When the pickup truck rumbled down the dirt road and vanished around the mountain curve, Michael released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The sheriff's actions confirmed one crucial fact: the mine wasn't just some pioneer's fantasy. Others believed it existed too, enough to break into private property searching for information. Returning to the farmhouse, Michael moved with newfound vigilance. Inside, the disruption was subtle but unmistakable to his trained eye. Drawers, slightly ajar, papers minutely rearranged, the kitchen chair positioned 2 inches from where he'd left it. The search had been professional, designed to leave minimal evidence of intrusion. Fortunately, the journal remained secure in his backpack, but the violation of his family's space ignited something primal within him, a fierce protectiveness over a legacy he'd been prepared to sell just days earlier. Sleep eluded him that night as he pored over the journal again, this time with heightened awareness of its value. When dawn broke, Michael began methodically photographing every page with his phone, creating a digital backup of the precious document. He then sought the most secure hiding place in the old farmhouse, a loose floorboard beneath his grandfather's bed that had been his childhood treasure chest during summer visits. Beneath it, he discovered a rusted metal box containing his grandfather's military medals and several old photographs. Among them was a faded sepia image of a stern-faced man standing before the newly built farmhouse. Turning it over, Michael read the inscription, Thomas Brennan, 1893. The face staring back at him bore the unmistakable Brennan family features, the same square jaw and determined eyes that Michael saw in his own mirror. "I understand now, Thomas," Michael whispered to the photograph. "You weren't just hiding gold, you were protecting our family." With renewed purpose, Michael dressed for a second expedition to the mine entrance, this time better prepared. He packed climbing gear, a high-powered flashlight, and a small pickaxe purchased from the hardware store in the nearest town. Most importantly, he brought a miniature camera drone he'd asked Claire to overnight from Denver, a tool that would allow him to explore the narrow mine entrance without risking his safety. The morning sun illuminated the canyon differently than the previous day, but Michael found the Hawk's Head formation more easily now that he knew its secret. The 3 petrified trees stood as silent sentinels, and soon the reduced waterfall came into view, still revealing the narrow fissure behind it. The footprints he'd noticed yesterday had been partially erased by overnight wind, but fresh marks suggested someone had returned even more recently. Michael deployed the drone, sending the small device into the narrow opening while he monitored its camera feed on his phone. The passage extended approximately 15 feet before opening into a larger chamber. The drone's lights revealed evidence of human activity, old mining tools, rotted wooden supports, and the unmistakable signs of deliberate collapse. Massive boulders blocked what appeared to be the main tunnel, precisely matching Thomas's journal description of how he had concealed the mine's entrance. As the drone ventured deeper, something caught the light, a reflective surface embedded in the chamber wall. Michael guided the device closer, and his breath caught. A vein of quartz-laced rock glinted in the drone's light, threaded with unmistakable seams of gold. Even to his untrained eye, the deposit looked substantial. Thomas hadn't exaggerated. The drone's battery warning flashed, forcing Michael to navigate it back through the narrow entrance before it lost power. He sat on a nearby boulder, staring at the final images captured on his phone, his mind calculating possibilities. The deposit he'd glimpsed was merely what was visible in the outer chamber. If Thomas's journal was accurate, the primary vein lay beyond the collapsed section, potentially containing millions in raw gold. A noise, the subtle displacement of gravel, broke his concentration. Michael wasn't alone. He pocketed his phone and turned slowly, scanning the surrounding terrain. The canyon's acoustics made it difficult to pinpoint the sound's origin, but decades-old instincts from childhood hunting trips with his grandfather alerted him to a presence on the ridge above. "I know you're there," Michael called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "You might as well show yourself." A moment of silence followed before a figure stood from behind a rocky outcropping. A woman in her early 30s, wearing hiking gear and a surprised expression. She carried a professional-grade camera with a telephoto lens. "How long did you know I was following you?" she asked, making her way down the slope with practiced ease. "Since the turn at Lightning Ridge," Michael lied, not wanting to reveal how oblivious he'd been until moments ago. "Want to tell me why? You're photographing me on private property." She reached the canyon floor and extended her hand. "Elena Blackwood. And technically, once you crossed the North Ridge, you left Brennan property and entered public land." The name hit Michael like physical blow. Blackwood, the same name as the mining company that had threatened Thomas Brennan in 1891. This couldn't be coincidence. "You're trespassing," he said, ignoring her outstretched hand. Elena lowered her arm, unperturbed. "I'm a geological surveyor conducting research for my doctoral thesis on historical mining operations in San Juan County." She gestured to the fissure behind the waterfall. "This site is mentioned in historical records as a potential prospect that was never fully developed. I've been documenting similar locations throughout the region." Her explanation sounded rehearsed, professional, and entirely false to Michael's ears. The name Blackwood couldn't be dismissed, nor could her specific interest in this obscure location that even he wouldn't have found without Thomas's journal. "Historical records?" Michael challenged. "What records specifically mention this site?" A flicker of hesitation crossed her face. "County mining claims from the 1890s. Several were filed for this area, but later abandoned." "By whom?" "Various prospectors. I'd have to check my notes for the specific names." Michael studied her carefully. Elena Blackwood was either a remarkable liar or telling a partial truth. Either way, her presence confirmed that others were actively interested in what might be hidden in these mountains. "You should be careful exploring old mines," he said, deciding to reveal nothing of his own purpose. "Most are unstable after all these years. I'm well aware of the dangers." She gestured to his backpack where the drone was visible. "Though you seem equipped for more than casual hiking yourself, Mr. Brennan." "Michael Brennan." Recognition flashed in her eyes. "Brennan? As in the Brennan farm? I heard the property was being sold to developers." "News travels fast. Small community, people talk." She studied him with newfound interest, especially when prime historic land is about to become a golf course and luxury condos. The conversation was veering into territory Michael preferred to avoid. "If you're done with your research, I suggest you find your way back to public trails. This canyon gets dangerous after dark." Elena smiled, unfazed by his dismissal. "I know these mountains better than most locals, Mr. Brennan. My family has been here for generations." She reached into her pocket and produced a business card. "If you're interested in the historical significance of your property before you sell it off, give me a call. There's more value in that land than what developers are offering, heritage that money can't replace." Michael reluctantly accepted the card, noting the University of Colorado logo and her credentials as a doctoral candidate in geological sciences. Everything appeared legitimate on the surface. "I'll keep that in mind," he replied non-committally. Elena adjusted her backpack and turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Mr. Brennan. Be careful who you trust around here. Some people have been waiting a very long time for certain secrets to resurface." With that cryptic warning, she began climbing the ridge, soon disappearing over its crest. Michael stared after her, unsettled by the encounter and its implications. If Elena Blackwood was who she claimed to be, her interest in the mine might be purely academic, but if she represented the same interests that had threatened Thomas Brennan a century ago, her appearance signaled danger. The sun was beginning, its descent behind the western peaks, casting long shadows through the canyon. Michael collected his equipment and began the trek back to the farmhouse, his mind wrestling with mounting questions. The sheriff's suspicious behavior, Elena Blackwood's appearance, and the undeniable evidence of gold all pointed to a mystery far larger than he had initially imagined. Back at the farmhouse, Michael secured the doors and windows before setting up his laptop on the kitchen table. With the help of a signal booster he'd purchased in town, he managed to establish a tenuous internet connection, enough to begin researching the key players in this unfolding drama. Sheriff Rawlins was easy to investigate. Harold Rawlins, 58, had served as county sheriff for nearly 20 years. Before that, he'd worked for various mining operations throughout the state, including a stint as security chief for Mountain Vista Resources, a modern corporation with no obvious connection to the historical Blackwood Mining Company. Elena Blackwood proved more elusive. Her university profile confirmed her position as a doctoral candidate specializing in historical mining operations, with several published papers on recovering and preserving mining heritage sites. Her family background wasn't mentioned, but a deeper search revealed that Blackwood Mining had indeed operated in Colorado during the late 1800s before being absorbed by larger companies during industry consolidation in the early 1900s. The most interesting discovery came when Michael cross-referenced property records. Mountain Vista Resources, Sheriff Rawlins's former employer, owned significant land parcels surrounding the Brennan farm. More tellingly, the company's CEO was listed as Victor Blackwood, presumably a descendant of the original mining family, and possibly related to Elena. "So everyone wants what's under this land," Michael murmured, pieces falling into place. The developer's offer to purchase his property now appeared suspiciously generous. They likely knew about the gold deposit and wanted to acquire the land without raising questions about its mineral rights. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Found something interesting about Blackwood Mining. Call when you can." Before he could respond, headlights swept across the kitchen window, a vehicle approaching on the farm's long dirt driveway. Michael quickly closed his laptop and moved to the window. The familiar pickup truck came into view. Sheriff Rawlins returning, this time officially. Michael opened the door before the sheriff could knock. "Twice in 2 days, Sheriff. I'm beginning to feel popular." Rawlins removed his hat, his weathered face unreadable in the porch light. "Just following up, Mr. Brennan. We've had reports of trespassers in the area, hikers straying onto private property. Wanted to make sure you haven't had any trouble." "Interesting timing," Michael replied carefully. "I did encounter someone today, a researcher named Elena Blackwood. She was photographing the old canyon on the north side of the property." A flicker of something, recognition, concern, or perhaps calculation, crossed the sheriff's face. Did she now? What did she want? Said she was documenting historical mining sites for her doctoral research. Michael watched the sheriff's reaction closely. The name Blackwood seems to have a long history in this county. "Some families have been here since the beginning," Rawlins acknowledged neutrally. "The Blackwoods, the Brennans, the Rawlins. Our histories are intertwined in these mountains." "And what history would that be exactly?" Michael pressed. "Because I'm finding gaps in my family's story that don't quite add up." The sheriff studied him silently before responding. "Every family has its secrets, Mr. Brennan. Some are better, left buried." He replaced his hat. "Lock your doors tonight. These mountains can bring out unusual interests in people." After the sheriff departed, Michael called Claire from the relative security of his car, away from the farmhouse that he now suspected might be under surveillance. "Tell me what you found," he said when she answered. "It's fascinating," Claire replied, her researcher's enthusiasm evident. Blackwood Mining was involved in a series of disputed claims in the 1890s. There were allegations of claim jumping, intimidation, even violence against smaller prospectors. The company was eventually investigated by federal authorities, but the case mysteriously dissolved when key witnesses disappeared or recanted their testimonies. "Any specific mention of Thomas Brennan?" "Nothing direct. But there was a newspaper article from 1891 about a mining engineer who died in a stagecoach accident while returning from Denver. The article mentioned he had been in dispute with Blackwood over a potential claim. No name was given, but the timing matches your great-great-grandfather's death." Michael's grip tightened on the phone. "What happened to Blackwood Mining afterwards?" "The company changed hands several times before being acquired by Mountain Vista Resources in the 1980s. Here's the interesting part. Mountain Vista is currently seeking permits for new mining operations throughout San Juan County, focusing on historically prospected areas. Let me guess, including land surrounding the old Brennan property?" "Exactly. They've been buying up parcels for years, creating a patchwork of ownership. Your family's farm is like a hole in the middle of their quilt." The pieces aligned. With disturbing clarity, Mountain Vista, the modern incarnation of Blackwood Mining, wanted access to the gold deposit Thomas had discovered and hidden. They likely knew its approximate location, but couldn't pinpoint it without the information in Thomas's journal. The developer offering to buy the farm was probably a front for their operation. "Claire, I need you to do something else for me. Find out everything you can about Mountain Vista's geological surveys in this area and see if there's any connection between them and Harmon Development, the company trying to buy the farm." "On it." "But Michael, what exactly have you found? Up there, you're not usually this cryptic." Michael hesitated, trusting Claire, but wary of saying too much over the phone. "Let's just say my family legacy might be more valuable than I realized. I'll explain everything when I see you." After ending the call, Michael sat in his car watching the farmhouse, seeing it with new eyes. The building wasn't just a deteriorating structure, but a deliberate construction, positioned to guard the canyon entrance, designed to appear as nothing more than a humble farmer's home while concealing its true purpose. Thomas Brennan had been protecting something worth killing for, and now, 130 years later, the same forces were circling again. That night, Michael barely slept, his mind racing with possibilities and dangers. By dawn, he had formulated a plan, risky but necessary. He would need to confirm the extent of the gold deposit and document it properly before he could protect it. That meant returning to the mine with proper equipment and somehow finding a way past the collapsed entrance Thomas had engineered. As first light broke over the eastern mountains, Michael drove into town, visiting hardware stores and outdoor suppliers to gather what he needed: climbing equipment, more powerful lights, battery packs, and basic mining tools. At a surveyor's office, he purchased detailed topographical maps of the canyon system that contained the mine. The clerk raised an eyebrow at his selections. "Doing some serious exploring, mister." "Research," Michael replied vaguely. "Family. History project." The clerk nodded knowingly. "Lots of history in these mountains. My granddaddy used to say every rock up there could tell a story if you knew how to listen." Back at the farm, Michael packed his supplies methodically, preparing for a longer expedition. The journal remained his most valuable tool, particularly the encoded instructions Thomas had included for navigating beyond the collapsed entrance. According to the text, the rubble blockage was primarily a deterrent. It concealed a narrow passage that would allow access to the main chamber if one knew exactly where to look. As Michael prepared to depart, a vehicle approached, not the sheriff's pickup this time, but a dust-covered jeep. Elena Blackwood stepped out, dressed again for fieldwork, her expression determined as she approached the house. "Mr. Brennan," she called, spotting him on the porch, "I need to speak with you. It's important." Michael concealed his unease behind a neutral expression. "I'm rather busy today, Miss Blackwood." "I know what you found in the canyon," she said, without preamble. "And you're in danger." The directness of her statement caught him off guard. "What are you talking about?" "The mine. Thomas Brennan's lost gold mine." She glanced around nervously before continuing. "Mountain Vista knows about it too. They've been searching for decades, buying up land, running surveys." Michael's instincts screamed caution, but something in Eleanor's expression, an urgency that seemed genuine, made him hesitate. "You'd better come inside," he said after a moment, leading her into the farmhouse kitchen where maps and equipment lay spread across the table. Elena took in the scene with a practiced eye. "You're planning to access the mine today." "I'm not confirming anything," Michael replied carefully. "You claimed I'm in danger." "Explain." Elena sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the topographical map Michael had marked with potential routes to the mine. "My full name is Eleanor Blackwood Hayes. Victor Blackwood is my uncle, CEO of Mountain Vista and direct descendant of the original Blackwood mining family. I've spent years researching what happened between our families in the 1890s. Why should I believe anything a Blackwood tells me? Because I'm trying to right a historical wrong." She reached into her backpack and withdrew a leather portfolio. "These are copies of my grandfather's private papers. They tell a different story than the company records." Michael reluctantly accepted the portfolio and began examining its contents. The documents included personal correspondence, legal papers, and newspaper clippings, all centered around the dispute between Blackwood Mining and various independent prospectors in the 1890s. One name appeared repeatedly: Thomas Brennan. According to my grandfather's journals, Eleanor continued, Thomas Brennan discovered an unprecedented gold deposit in 1891. He approached James Blackwood, my great-great-grandfather, with a partnership proposal, but James betrayed him, attempting to claim the discovery for himself when Thomas went to Denver to file the proper documentation. Michael found a particular letter that corroborated her statement, a message from James Blackwood to his lawyer discussing strategies to undermine Thomas Brennan's claim through legal maneuvering and intimidation. The stagecoach accident that killed Thomas wasn't an accident, Elena said quietly. It was arranged by James Blackwood, but he never found the gold because Thomas had hidden all evidence of its location. Evidence I believe you've recently discovered. The accusation matched the implications in Thomas's journal, but Michael maintained his guard. That's quite a family confession, Miss Blackwood Hayes. Why turn against your own blood? Eleanor's expression hardened. Some legacies aren't worth preserving. Mountain Vista, my family's company, has systematically exploited these mountains for generations, leaving environmental damage and broken communities in their wake. My research began as academic interest, but became something more personal when I discovered the truth about Thomas Brennan's death. And Sheriff Rollins? Where does he fit in this conspiracy? He's on Mountain Vista's payroll, has been for years. His job before becoming sheriff was security for my uncle's mining operations. He reports directly to Victor about anything unusual in the county, especially activity around your property. Michael processed this information, comparing it with his own discoveries. Elena's story aligned with the evidence, but trusting her remained a significant risk. Why come forward now? Why not just let Mountain Vista buy the property through their developer front? Because my uncle is desperate, Elena replied, leaning forward intently. Mountain Vista is nearly bankrupt after a series of failed international ventures. The company has mortgaged everything on finding this deposit. They're not planning a careful archaeological excavation. They'll strip mine the entire canyon, if necessary. And what do you want from it? Michael challenged. Redemption for the Blackwood name? I want the truth preserved. This isn't just about gold. It's about historical justice. Thomas Brennan was a brilliant engineer who developed mining techniques decades ahead of his time. His journal, which I'm assuming you found, contains valuable historical information beyond just the mine's location. Michael remained silent, neither confirming nor denying his possession of the journal. Eleanor continued earnestly. Whatever you decide about the gold, the historical record deserves to be set right. Thomas Brennan shouldn't remain an anonymous victim of corporate greed. His innovations should be recognized. Her passion seemed genuine, but Michael had spent years in corporate environments where sincerity was often masterfully feigned. Even if I believed you, what exactly are you proposing? A partnership, but not like the one that doomed our ancestors. I have the geological expertise to help verify and document the deposit. You have legal claim to the property and whatever's beneath it. Together, we could approach state historical preservation authorities before Mountain Vista realizes what we've found. Michael considered the offer. Having an expert in historical mining operations would certainly help navigate the site safely. If Elena was trustworthy, her knowledge would prove invaluable. If she wasn't, better to keep her close where he could monitor her actions. If we do this, he said finally, we play by my rules. The journal stays with me. All discoveries are documented with both of us present. And one wrong move, one hint that you're feeding information to your uncle, and our arrangement ends immediately." Elena nodded, relief visible in her expression. "Agreed, but we need to move quickly. Sheriff Rawlins has surely reported our meeting yesterday, which means Mountain Vista will be watching more closely now." "We leave in an hour," Michael decided. "Pack only what you absolutely need. I'll bring the specialized equipment." While Eleanor returned to her jeep to prepare, Michael quickly photographed her documents, creating digital copies before returning the portfolio. He then called Claire, keeping his voice low. "I need another favor. Research Eleanor Blackwood Hayes, doctoral candidate at University of Colorado. Find out if there's any rift between her and Victor Blackwood at Mountain Vista, and check county records for any recent permit applications for the land surrounding the farm." After ending the call, Michael packed the journal securely in his backpack, along with climbing gear, lights, and emergency supplies. He hesitated over whether to bring a weapon, finally tucking his grandfather's old .38 revolver into an inner pocket. Thomas's experiences had proven that gold brought out the worst in people, and Michael wouldn't be caught unprepared. When they departed an hour later, Michael insisted they take his SUV rather than Elena's more recognizable Jeep. They left the farm through a back access road, an overgrown track that Thomas had mentioned in his journal as an emergency escape route. Elena raised an eyebrow at Michael's knowledge of this hidden path, but said nothing. The journey to the canyon took longer via this route, but Michael felt confident they had avoided potential observers. By midday, they had reached the vicinity of the mine entrance, approaching from above rather than through the canyon floor, as Michael had done previously. Thomas was brilliant, Elena remarked as they surveyed the terrain from their elevated position. This entire setup was designed to misdirect. The obvious canyon path would be the first place searchers would look, but it's exposed and easily monitored. The actual operational entrance would have been concealed elsewhere. Michael retrieved Thomas's journal, turning to passages he'd studied the previous night. He mentions a supply shaft, distinct from the main entrance, one that would appear as a natural feature unless you knew exactly what to look for. Together they scoured the ridgeline, comparing the modern landscape with Thomas's descriptions. Decades of erosion and vegetation growth had altered some features, but the fundamental geology remained unchanged. After an hour of methodical searching, Elena pointed to a peculiar arrangement of boulders near a stunted pine. "There, that's not a natural formation. Those rocks were placed to hide something." Upon closer inspection, Michael realized she was right. The boulders, though weathered and partially embedded in the hillside, had been deliberately positioned to shield a narrow vertical shaft. Vegetation had grown around and over the opening, further disguising it from casual observation. "This matches Thomas's description of the air supply shaft," Michael confirmed, consulting the journal. He reinforced it with timber supports and concealed the entrance after the main tunnel was blocked. Using climbing gear, they carefully cleared the opening and secured ropes for descent. The shaft dropped approximately 30 feet before opening into a horizontal tunnel reinforced with ancient timber supports that remained remarkably intact in the dry mountain air. "Old-growth timber," Elena observed, examining the wooden beams, "properly cured and treated with pine pitch. That's why they've survived so long. Your ancestor was meticulous in his engineering." They proceeded cautiously, their headlamps illuminating a tunnel that showed both natural erosion and deliberate human excavation. The air was stale but breathable, suggesting some form of natural ventilation remained active. After approximately 200 feet, the tunnel intersected a larger passage that Elena identified as the main shaft of the mine. "We should be beyond the collapsed section now," she whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "The main chamber should be ahead if Thomas's journal is accurate." Michael consulted the hand-drawn map from the journal, comparing it with their surroundings. "This way," he indicated, turning left along the larger tunnel. As they advanced, evidence of serious mining operations became more apparent. Tool marks on the walls, remnants of rail tracks for ore carts, and occasionally the glint of quartz veins threading through the stone. Elena stopped periodically to examine these features, her excitement growing visibly. These extraction methods were advanced for the 1890s, she noted, studying tool marks in the rock face. Thomas was using techniques that wouldn't become industry standard for another 20 years. After navigating several turns and one partially collapsed section that required careful climbing, they emerged into a large chamber that stole their breath away. Their combined headlamps couldn't illuminate the entire space, but what they revealed was extraordinary. The chamber walls glittered with quartz seams heavily laced with gold, not just traces or flecks, but substantial veins of the precious metal running through the rock like radiant arteries. Ancient mining equipment stood eerily preserved: ore carts, pickaxes, shovels, and primitive drilling equipment, all positioned as if the miners had simply stepped away momentarily rather than abandoning the site 130 years ago. "My God," Elena whispered, her voice tinged with academic awe rather than gold fever. "This is the most perfectly preserved 19th century mining operation I've ever seen. It's a time capsule." Michael moved deeper into the chamber, his headlamp catching a reflection from the far wall. A metal strongbox sat on a crude wooden table, its surface etched with the now familiar tree design that marked the journal's cover. With trembling hands he approached it, finding it secured with a simple but sturdy lock. "The final piece of the puzzle," he murmured, removing the journal from his backpack. The lock mechanism matched a drawing on one of the journal's final pages, a unique design that Thomas had created himself. Following the diagram's instructions, Michael manipulated the lock, feeling internal mechanisms shift until it finally clicked open. Inside lay a leather portfolio similar to the one Elena had shown him, but far older. Michael carefully opened it to reveal survey maps, geological assessments, legal documents, and most significantly, Thomas Brennan's original claim to the mine, fully notarized and legally filed, contrary to historical records suggesting he had died before completing the registration. "This changes everything," Elena said, examining the documents with professional care. "These papers prove Thomas legally secured the claim before his murder. By law, this mine and its contents would have passed to his heirs. Your family. Mountain Vista has no legal claim whatsoever, regardless of who owns the surrounding land." Beneath the portfolio lay something else, a small leather-bound book, different from the journal Michael had found in the attic. This one contained personal writings, more intimate than the technical descriptions in the main journal. Michael read a passage aloud. "I establish this mine and claim not for personal wealth, though its riches would ensure generations of comfort. Rather, I secure it for what it might provide in times of great need. not just for my family, but for this valley and its people. Gold blinds men to what truly matters. Land, community, the knowledge passed from one generation to the next. These are the real treasures that endure when gold has lost its luster. Should you who find this share my blood, consider carefully how this discovery might serve more than mere fortune. The words resonated deeply with Michael, cutting through his initial excitement over the gold's monetary value. Thomas hadn't been merely a prospector seeking wealth. He'd been a visionary who understood that true legacy transcended material riches. He wasn't just hiding the gold from Blackwood, Michael realized. He was preserving it for a greater purpose, waiting for the right moment when it could do more than enrich a single family. Elena nodded thoughtfully. The historical context supports that interpretation. The 1890s saw massive labor unrest in Colorado mining communities. Workers were exploited, communities devastated by corporate mining practices. Thomas may have witnessed enough to know that his discovery could cause more harm than good if developed during that era. As they continued exploring the chamber, they discovered additional journals and technical drawings that revealed Thomas's true genius. He had designed mining methods specifically to minimize environmental impact, techniques that, even by modern standards, were remarkably sustainable. His notes described systems for water purification, erosion control, and land reclamation that the industry wouldn't adopt for nearly a century. "Your ancestor wasn't just an engineer," Elena said with growing respect. "He was an environmental pioneer at a time when such concepts barely existed. These documents alone are historically priceless." Michael sat on an overturned crate, overwhelmed by the implications of their discovery. The gold was valuable beyond calculation, likely worth hundreds of millions by current market prices. But Thomas's innovations and forward-thinking approach to responsible resource extraction represented a different kind of wealth, intellectual capital that could transform modern mining practices. "What would you do with this discovery?" he asked Elena suddenly. "Hypothetically, if the decision were entirely yours." She considered the question carefully. "I'd preserve it," she answered finally. "Not as a working mine, but as a living museum and research center. The gold would fund it, of course, extracting enough to establish an endowment while leaving the site substantially intact for future study. Thomas Brennan's methods could revolutionize how we think about sustainable mining practices today." Her answer aligned remarkably with the thoughts forming in Michael's own mind. The corporate path he'd been following in Denver suddenly seemed hollow compared to the legacy Thomas had preserved for his descendants. Not just material wealth, but purposeful knowledge. Their reflections were interrupted by a distant sound, echoing through the tunnels, voices and footsteps growing closer. "Someone's coming," Michael whispered, quickly returning the documents to the strongbox. "We need to hide." They extinguished their headlamps and concealed themselves behind mining equipment in the chamber's darkest corner. Minutes later, flashlight beams cut through the darkness as three figures entered the chamber. Sheriff Rawlins, a man in expensive outdoor gear whom Michael didn't recognize, and a third person whose voice Michael identified immediately. The representative from Harmon Development who'd made the offer on the farm. "Incredible," the unknown man breathed, his flashlight playing across the gold-laden walls. Victor was right. It's all here, untouched. "I told you Brennan found something," the sheriff replied. "Saw him heading this way yesterday with equipment. Must have found old Thomas's journal just like you predicted." "And the Blackwood girl?" the developer asked. "You said she contacted him." "Turned traitor against her own family," the sheriff spat. "Been causing trouble for Mountain Vista for years with her environmental activism, probably filling Brennan's head with preservation nonsense." The well-dressed man, whom Michael now presumed to be Victor Blackwood, surveyed the chamber with calculating eyes. "Doesn't matter. Once we control the property, we control everything beneath it. The historical claim died with Thomas Brennan. Modern mineral rights law is on our side." "Brennan hasn't signed the sale papers yet," the developer reminded him. "And if he's discovered what this place contains, he might back out." Victor's laugh echoed coldly through the chamber. "That's why we have contingency plans. A tragic accident while exploring dangerous old mining tunnels. Such a shame. The property passes to distant relatives who'll be much more amenable to our offer." The casual discussion of his planned murder sent ice through Michael's veins. Beside him, Elena tensed, her hand finding his arm in the darkness. Michael felt the weight of his grandfather's revolver, but knew they were outnumbered and outpositioned. "We should retrieve Brennan's body after the collapse," the sheriff was saying. "Can't risk anyone else finding it and asking questions." "Let's set the charges here," Victor instructed, pointing to key support beams. "Timer set for 30 minutes. That gives us plenty of time to clear out and establish alibis." As the three men moved deeper into the chamber to place explosive charges, Michael signaled to Elena. They needed to escape immediately. With the intruders' attention focused elsewhere, they crept toward the tunnel entrance, keeping to shadows and moving with agonizing slowness to avoid detection. They had nearly reached the exit when Eleanor's boot dislodged a small stone, sending it skittering across the chamber floor. The sound, amplified by the cavern's acoustics, instantly alerted their pursuers. "Someone's here!" the sheriff shouted, his flashlight beam sweeping toward them. "Run!" Michael urged, pushing Elena ahead of him into the tunnel as a gunshot echoed through the chamber, the bullet ricocheting off stone inches from his head. They sprinted through the dark passage. Michael and Elena fled through the winding tunnels, their path illuminated only by the weak beam of Michael's backup flashlight. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind them, angry shouts and occasional gunfire that spurred them to greater speed despite the danger of running in near darkness. "We can't go back the way we came," Elena gasped as they paused at a junction. "They'll expect that. We need another exit." Michael frantically consulted his mental map of Thomas's journal. "There's a secondary escape tunnel. Thomas mentioned it was disguised as a natural cave formation. It should branch off somewhere ahead." They pressed on, Michael leading the way through a narrowing passage where centuries of mineral deposits had created ghostly formations that seemed to reach for them in the dim light. Behind them, their pursuers' voices grew momentarily fainter as the complex tunnel system confused the echo patterns. "There!" Elena pointed to a barely perceptible crack in the wall that matched Thomas's description of the hidden exit. The opening was small, almost too small for an adult to pass through, but desperation lent them flexibility as they squeezed through the narrow gap. Beyond the opening, the passage widened into what appeared to be a natural cave system, though subtle tool marks revealed human enhancement of the natural formation. They progressed more quickly now, the cave sloping gradually upward toward the surface. "How much time until the explosives detonate?" Elena asked between ragged breaths. Michael checked his watch. 15 minutes, maybe less. We need to clear the entire hillside in case of collapse." The cave system eventually opened into a brush-covered hillside, nearly half a mile from their original entry point. They emerged into late afternoon sunlight, momentarily blinded after the darkness below. Without pausing to celebrate their escape, they sprinted toward the tree line, seeking cover in the forest that would shield them from view. Only when they had put considerable distance between themselves and the mine did they pause, collapsing behind the massive trunk of a fallen ponderosa pine. Michael immediately pulled out his phone, relieved to find a weak signal. "We need to call for help," Elena urged. Michael shook his head grimly. "And tell them what? That the county sheriff is conspiring to commit murder. We need evidence first." He dialed Claire's number, keeping his voice low. "Claire, emergency situation. I need you to contact the state police and the FBI field office in Denver. Tell them there's an active situation involving Sheriff Rawlins at Brennan Farm. Possible attempted murder, definitely destruction of historical artifacts. And Claire, make sure they understand the sheriff is involved. Local police can't be trusted." As Michael ended the call, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. In the distance, a plume of dust rose from the hillside as the explosives detonated, collapsing portions of the mine. Elena gazed at the destruction with undisguised anguish, the historian in her mourning the loss of irreplaceable historical artifacts. "We have to assume they'll come looking for us," Michael said, already moving again. "They need to confirm we died in that collapse, and when they don't find bodies, they'll hunt us down." "Where can we go?" Eleanor asked. "They'll watch your farm, my apartment, any obvious hiding place." Michael considered their options. "I know somewhere they won't think to look, but first we need to retrieve something from the farmhouse, something that might save both our lives." They traveled cross-country, avoiding roads and open spaces where they might be spotted. The journey back to the farm took over 2 hours on foot, but by approaching from the dense forest behind the property, they were able to observe the house without being seen. Sheriff Rawlins's truck was parked in the yard, and flashlight beams moved within the darkened house. "They're searching for the journal," Michael whispered, "but they won't find it." "Where is it?" Elena asked. "With me. I wasn't about to leave. It behind." He patted his backpack. "But there's something else in the house we need. Evidence my grandfather collected that Thomas left behind." They waited as darkness fell, watching as the sheriff and another deputy eventually departed, presumably to continue searching elsewhere. When the property had been quiet for 30 minutes, Michael led Elena to a dilapidated shed behind the barn that appeared neglected to the point of collapse. "My grandfather built this to look abandoned," Michael explained, carefully lifting a hidden trapdoor beneath a pile of seemingly random junk. "But it conceals a root cellar that the family maintained for generations." Below the trapdoor, a sturdy ladder descended into a surprisingly large underground room lined with shelving. Instead of storing vegetables, however, the shelves held metal document boxes, each labeled with a year. Michael moved directly to one, marked 1891. "My grandfather was the family historian," Michael explained as he opened the box. "He collected everything related to Thomas Brennan that survived: correspondence, newspaper clippings, legal documents, things too sensitive to keep in the house but too valuable to destroy." Inside the box, they found a treasure trove of evidence. Letters between Thomas and his brother describing his fears about Blackwood mining, documentation of threats made against him, and most significantly, a sworn affidavit Thomas had filed. with a Denver attorney detailing James Blackwood's criminal activities. The attorney had apparently died before acting on the information, and the document had been returned to the Brennan family. "This is exactly what we need," Elena breathed, examining the papers. "Combined with my grandfather's confession and the original claim documents we found in the mine, this establishes a clear historical record of what really happened." Michael noticed another box, smaller and unmarked, pushed to the back of the shelf. Inside, he found a leather pouch containing several large gold nuggets and a note in his grandfather's handwriting. "Thomas's insurance policy. Use only in direst need." The gold represented a substantial sum, enough to sustain them while they fought what would undoubtedly be a complicated legal battle. They gathered the essential documents and the gold. Then Michael sealed the cellar again, concealing all evidence of their visit. "We can't stay here. They'll return once they realize we survived the collapse." "Where then?" Eleanor asked. "Somewhere. They'd never think to look for us," Michael replied. "Somewhere hidden in plain sight." 2 hours later, they emerged from a forest trail onto the property of Mountain Vista's primary competitor, Clearwater Mining and Conservation, a company known for its sustainable practices and ongoing legal battles with Victor Blackwood's operation. The property featured a research center dedicated to developing environmentally responsible mining techniques. "My former college roommate runs their historical preservation department," Michael explained as they approached a modern building nestled among pine trees. "If anyone will understand what we've discovered, it's him." Dr. Marcus Chen was initially skeptical when his security team alerted him to unexpected visitors at nearly midnight, but his expression changed to amazement as Michael revealed his identity and summarized their situation. He immediately ushered them into a secure conference room and called the company's legal team. "This is extraordinary," Marcus said, examining Thomas's journal with a scholar's reverence. "The historical significance alone is immense, quite apart from the gold deposit. Thomas Brennan appears to have developed sustainable mining techniques that were decades ahead of their time." "Exactly what I've been researching," Elena confirmed. "His methods could revolutionize how we approach mining today, minimizing environmental impact while still accessing necessary resources." As Clearwater's legal counsel arrived, Michael and Elena presented the evidence they'd gathered. Thomas's original claim, the historical documents proving Blackwood's criminal conspiracy, and Elena's grandfather's confession about what really happened in 1891. The lawyers recognized immediately the significance of what they'd brought. "This isn't just about a gold mine," the head attorney explained. "This is about rectifying a historical injustice while establishing legal precedent for how historical mineral rights are handled. If everything you've shown us is authenticated, the Brennan family has legitimate claim, not just to the gold deposit, but potentially to damages from Mountain Vista as the corporate successor to Blackwood Mining." "We need to move quickly," Marcus advised. "Once Victor Blackwood realizes you survived, he'll accelerate his plans to acquire the farm through your distant relatives. We need to file injunctions immediately to prevent any transfer of ownership." Throughout the night, they worked with Clearwater's team to document everything they'd discovered and prepare legal filings. By dawn, armed security personnel provided by the company had established protection for both Michael and Elena, while digital copies of all their evidence were secured in multiple locations. "I've contacted my colleagues at the University Historical," Preservation Department, Elena explained while reviewing documents with Michael. They're preparing emergency applications to have the site declared a protected historical landmark, which would prevent any development regardless of who owns the mineral rights. Michael nodded, though his thoughts had evolved beyond mere legal strategy. Thomas's personal journal entries had affected him deeply, particularly the passages about legacy and responsibility. The gold's monetary value now seemed almost secondary to the knowledge and vision Thomas had preserved for future generations. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked, noticing his pensive expression. "I'm thinking about what Thomas really wanted," Michael replied. "He could have simply hidden the gold, but instead he created an elaborate system to preserve not just the mine, but his vision for how it should be used. He wasn't just protecting wealth, he was protecting wisdom." The following days unfolded. In a whirlwind of legal maneuvers, law enforcement investigations, and media attention. State police arrested Sheriff Rawlins attempting to flee the county, and his subsequent plea deal implicated Victor Blackwood in multiple criminal conspiracies. FBI agents raided Mountain Vista's offices, seizing documents that revealed decades of corporate malfeasance extending far beyond the Brennan property. The story captivated national media. A century-old murder mystery solved, a forgotten gold mine rediscovered, a corporate conspiracy exposed. Michael found himself thrust into an unexpected spotlight as journalists clamored for interviews about his remarkable discovery. Through it all, he held firm to a vision that was crystallizing in his mind, a vision inspired by Thomas's writings and reinforced by Elena's passionate advocacy for historical preservation. 3 months after their harrowing escape from the mine, Michael stood before a gathered crowd at the Brennan farm. The property had been transformed, not into the luxury development Harmon had planned, but into the headquarters of the Thomas Brennan Center for Sustainable Resource Management, funded by a carefully extracted portion of the mine's gold, the only excavation that would ever take place there. The center would serve as both historical museum and research facility dedicated to advancing Thomas's visionary approaches to responsible mining. "My great-great-grandfather understood something that we're only beginning to grasp today," Michael addressed the assembled dignitaries, media representatives, and local residents. "Resources have value beyond their market price. Their true worth lies in how they connect us to our history and how they can be used to create a better future." Elena stood beside him at the podium, now the center's first director of historical research. Her expertise had been instrumental in preserving the mine as an underground museum where visitors could witness both natural geological formations and 19th-century mining innovations. "Thomas Brennan didn't just discover gold," she explained to the audience. "He discovered a method of resource extraction that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term profit. His techniques, documented in extraordinary detail in his journals, might have transformed the mining industry a century ago had they not been suppressed through violence and criminal conspiracy." The Thomas Brennan Center represented something unprecedented, a collaboration between academic researchers, environmentalists, and ethical mining companies to develop next-generation extraction methods based on Thomas's pioneering work. Already, several of his innovations had been adapted for modern application, proving remarkably effective at reducing environmental impact. As for the farm itself, Michael had implemented another aspect of Thomas's vision. The agricultural land remained productive, but now operated as a demonstration project for sustainable farming techniques that complemented responsible mining practices. Local farmers who had initially viewed Michael with suspicion now regularly visited to learn methods that increased their yields while reducing environmental damage. The legal battle with Mountain Vista continued, but with the weight of evidence against them and their CEO under criminal indictment, the outcome seemed increasingly certain. More significantly, Michael had established the Brennan Foundation, which would ensure that benefits from the gold mine, extracted gradually and with minimal environmental impact, would flow primarily to the local community rather than distant shareholders. After the ceremony, Michael and Elena walked the property together, following the path Thomas must have taken countless times between the farmhouse and the hidden canyon. "You know, when I first came here to sell this place, I thought I was unloading a worthless family relic," Michael reflected. "I couldn't understand why my grandfather was so determined to keep it in the family." Eleanor smiled. He knew there was more here than met the eye, even if he didn't know exactly what Thomas had hidden. "It wasn't just the gold," Michael said, gazing across the land that had acquired new meaning for him. "It was the purpose behind it. Thomas didn't hide that mine to make his descendants rich. He preserved it so it could be used at the right time, in the right way." "And you think this is that time?" Michael nodded. "Look at what we've already accomplished. Sustainable mining techniques developed from Thomas's journals are being implemented in operations across 4 continents. The educational programs at the center have already attracted students from 27 countries. Thomas's vision is spreading in ways he could never have imagined." They reached the ridge overlooking the canyon where their adventure had begun. The entrance to the mine was now properly secured and preserved, the surrounding land designated as a protected historical site. Where Victor Blackwood had planned a destructive strip mining operation, nature remained undisturbed except for carefully designed educational trails. "I've been thinking about your family legacy too," Michael said after a comfortable silence. "The Blackwood name doesn't have to be forever associated with exploitation and corruption. Through your work, you're creating a new legacy, one of truth, restoration, and responsible stewardship." Eleanor's expression softened. "I think that's what drawn me to this work from the beginning. Even before I knew the specific history between our families, I sensed that there was a wrong that needed to be righted." "Thomas would be proud of what we've created here," Michael said. "Not because of the gold's value, but because we understood what he was really trying to preserve." Later that evening, in what had once been the farmhouse kitchen and was now the center's administrative office, Michael reopened Thomas's journal to an entry he'd come to see as the heart of his ancestor's philosophy. "Wealth extracted, but not replenished, diminishes all. Gold taken without care scars the land and corrupts the soul. But resources harvested with wisdom and reverence can build communities that endure beyond a single lifetime. The true measure of a mine's value is not in the metal it yields, but in the legacy it creates. The lives improved, the knowledge gained, the land preserved for generations yet unborn." Michael had those words inscribed on a plaque at the center's entrance, a daily reminder of the principles that had transformed not just the Brennan farm, but his own understanding of worth and legacy. Where he had once measured success in financial statements and investment returns, he now saw it in the faces of local students learning sustainable agriculture, in the enthusiastic discussions of mining engineers studying Thomas's techniques, in the gradually healing landscapes around former extraction sites where the center's methods were being implemented. The gold that had nearly cost Michael his life had indeed proved valuable beyond measure, not for its market price, but for the vision it had preserved and the future it was helping to create. Through Thomas's foresight, a deadly corporate conspiracy had ultimately given birth to a movement for responsible resource management that was spreading globally. 1 year to the day after discovering the journal in his grandfather's attic, Michael stood at the farmhouse window watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of amber and gold. The view reminded him of the first lines in Thomas's journal. The true wealth of these mountains cannot be measured in ounces or counted in dollars. It resides in the knowledge they contain, in the lessons they teach those patient enough to listen. Michael had listened, and in doing so had discovered a purpose far more fulfilling than the corporate career he'd left behind. The farm that he'd once viewed as a burden had become the foundation for work that would benefit generations to come. Work that honored not just the Brennan name, but the universal principles of sustainability and responsible stewardship that Thomas had championed a century before his time. On his desk lay architectural plans for the center's next phase, an international campus where scholars and industry leaders could collaborate on integrating Thomas's methods into modern resource management. Beside it sat a framed photograph of Michael's grandfather, standing proudly before the farmhouse, his weathered face bearing the same determined expression Michael had seen in Thomas's portrait. Though neither man had known precisely what lay hidden beneath their land, both had somehow understood its importance enough to preserve it for the future. Elena entered the office, carrying new translations of Thomas's technical notes that were being prepared for publication in scientific journals. The Geological Society wants to establish an annual award in Thomas's name, she announced, for innovation in sustainable mining practices. Michael smiled at the fitting tribute. He never sought recognition, just wanted to do things the right way, even when everyone around him was taking shortcuts. "Sound like anyone else I know?" Eleanor asked with a knowing look. The question made Michael reflect on his own transformation. A year ago, he had been a different person, focused on financial metrics, career advancement, and material success. The journal that had nearly gotten him killed had also saved him from a life of comfortable meaninglessness, revealing a purpose that connected him to something larger than himself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.